I was 42 years old when I walked out of my father's house and slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. That was the last time we spoke for 50 years. 50 years, half a century of silence between a father and son, all because of one terrible night, one horrible mistake, and two people too proud to say sorry first. My name is Robert, and I'm 92 years old now. Last month I sat beside my father's hospital bed and heard the three words I never thought I'd hear. He was 97, dying, and he looked at me with tears running down his face and said, "I forgive you." But let me take you back to where it all started, because this story isn't just about forgiveness. It's about the poison of pride, the weight of regret, and the precious time we waste convincing ourselves we're right. It was 1972. I was young, angry, and convinced I knew everything. My father, William, was a strict man who believed in hard work, discipline, and doing things his way. We'd butted heads my whole life, but that night was different. I'd gotten my girlfriend Mary pregnant. We were both 22, not married, and in those days that was a scandal. I wanted to marry her immediately, start our life together, figure things out as we went. My father had other ideas. He sat me down in his study, that same mahogany desk where he disciplined me as a child, and told me I was throwing my life away. He said Mary wasn't good enough for our family, that I should break up with her, that he'd arrange everything to be taken care of quietly. The way he said it, so cold, so calculated, like my child was just a problem to solve. I saw red. I called him controlling. He called me irresponsible. I said he'd never loved me, only loved the idea of who he wanted me to be. He said I was selfish and immature. Then I said the words I'd spent 50 years regretting. I told him I hated him, that he was a bitter old man and that I never wanted to see him again. He stood up, pointed to the door and said, "Then get out of my house and don't come back." So I did. I married Mary 2 weeks later. My father didn't come to the wedding. The thing about pride is that it hardens like concrete. In the beginning, I told myself I was right, that he was the one who needed to apologize. Mary tried to bridge the gap a few times in those early years. She'd suggest I call him, just to talk, just to let him meet our daughter Sarah when she was born, but I refused. I built a wall around that hurt and defended it like it was something precious. My mother tried too. She'd call me in secret, crying, begging me to just pick up the phone and talk to him. She'd say, "He's stubborn, but he's your father, and he loves you even if he doesn't know how to show it." I'd tell her he knew where I lived, he had my number, and if he wanted to talk, he could make the first move. It became a standoff. Two men, both waiting for the other to blink. Meanwhile, life kept happening. Sarah grew up without knowing her grandfather. She'd ask about him sometimes, why we never visited Grandpa like her friends did, and I'd give vague answers about complicated adult problems. I told myself I was protecting her from his coldness, but really, I was protecting my own pride. Years turned into decades. My mother passed away in 1985, and that was the first time I saw my father in 13 years. We stood on opposite sides of her grave, both of us crying, both of us looking at each other across that space, and neither of us could move. After the funeral, we stood in the parking lot for a moment. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, and I waited, my heart pounding, thinking this was it. This was when we'd finally break. But then he just nodded, got in his car, and drove away. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself he was impossible, but that night I cried harder than I had since I was a child. Mary held me and said, "It's not too late. You can still call him." But I didn't. Pride is a prison, and I'd become so comfortable in my cell that I didn't know how to leave anymore. The silence stretched on. Birthdays passed. Holidays came and went. Sarah graduated high school, then college, then got married. My father wasn't there. Then Sarah had a son, my grandson Michael. and something shifted in me. Holding that tiny baby in my arms, I suddenly understood what my father must have felt when I was born, that overwhelming love mixed with fear of doing everything wrong. I started thinking about all the years we'd lost, all the moments we'd never get back. I was 65 years old, and my father was 90. How much time did we have left? I decided I'd call him. Tomorrow, I told myself. But tomorrow turned into next week, next month, next year. Fear joined pride in that prison cell. What if he hung up on me? What if he didn't want to hear from me? What if I called and found out he'd forgotten about me entirely, moved on, built a life that didn't include me? So I waited, and waited, and let more years slip through my fingers like sand. I watched Michael grow from baby to toddler to child. He was 7 years old when my phone rang one Tuesday morning. It was a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, professional and kind, said, "Is this Robert?" "I'm calling from Mercy Hospital. Your father, William, has been admitted. He's asking for you." My hands shook so badly that Mary had to drive me to the hospital. 50 years of silence, and now I was going to see him again. What would I say? Would he even recognize me? I was 92, he was 97. We were both old men now, our angry young selves long gone, replaced by these fragile bodies and accumulated regrets. The nurse led me to his room. Room 412. I stood outside that door for 10 minutes, my hand on the handle, unable to turn it. A nurse passed by and smiled at me gently. "He's been waiting for you," she said. That nearly broke me right there. I opened the door. The man in the bed looked so small. My father had always seemed larger than life, powerful, unmovable. Now he was tiny under those white sheets, tubes in his arms, oxygen in his nose. But his eyes, those same blue eyes I remembered, they focused on me immediately. "Robert," he whispered. I walked to his bedside on legs that barely held me. "I'm here, Dad?" That was the first time I'd called him that in 50 years, and my voice cracked on the word. His hand, thin and covered with age spots, reached for mine. I took it, and we both started crying. "I'm sorry," I said. The words tumbled out, words I'd held back for half a century. "I'm so sorry for what I said, for walking out, for all these years. I was young and stupid, and so angry, and I've regretted it every single day." He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong, Robert. I was scared. Scared of losing control, scared of you making mistakes, scared of not being the father I thought I needed to be. I drove you away because I couldn't bend, couldn't see that loving you meant letting you live your own life." We sat there crying, two old men finally letting down the walls we'd built so carefully. He asked about Mary, and I told him she was in the waiting room, that she'd never stopped hoping we'd reconcile. His face lit up. "She sounds like a wonderful woman." I told him she was, that marrying her was the best decision I ever made, and I saw something in his eyes, maybe understanding, maybe regret, for missing out on knowing her. Then he asked about Sarah. "Tell me about my granddaughter," he said, and my heart broke all over again. I pulled out my phone and showed him pictures. Sarah as a baby, as a teenager, on her wedding day, holding Michael. He stared at each photo like he was memorizing it, tears streaming down his face. "She's beautiful," he said. "She looks like your mother." Then I showed him Michael, and he smiled, really smiled. "A great-grandson," he whispered. "I missed so much." "Yes," I said honestly, "we both did. We missed so much because we were too stubborn to pick up a phone." He nodded, and for a moment, we just sat in that truth, in the weight of all those lost years. Then he said something that I'll carry with me until my own last breath. "Robert, I forgive you, and I hope you can forgive me, because this This right here, this is all that matters, not who was right or who was wrong. Just that we're here now, together, before it's too late. I forgive you, I said, squeezing his hand. I forgive you, Dad. We talked for hours that day. He told me about his life, the decades I'd missed, how he'd thought about calling me 1,000 times, but convinced himself I didn't want to hear from him, how he'd driven past my house once, years ago, just to see where I lived, but couldn't bring himself to knock, how every Christmas he'd set a place at the table for me, just in case I showed up, how my mother had made him promise before she died that he'd try to reach out to me, and how he'd broken that promise because his pride was stronger than his word. I told him my side too, the guilt I'd carried, the way I'd see fathers and sons together and feel like I had a hole in my chest. How I'd written him letters dozens of times but never sent them. How I'd picked up the phone on his birthday every year, dialed all but the last digit, then hung up. We'd been living parallel lives of regret, both of us suffering, both of us alone, separated by nothing but our own stubbornness. What a waste, he said quietly. What a terrible, stupid waste. He asked to meet Mary, so I brought her in. She sat on the other side of his bed and took his hand, and he said, "Thank you for taking care of my son. Thank you for not giving up on him." She cried and told him she'd always hoped this day would come. The next day, I brought Sarah and Michael. Watching my father meet his granddaughter for the first time, seeing her hug him gently and call him Grandpa, seeing Michael, innocent and curious, climb up on the bed to show his great-grandfather his toy cars, I realized what we'd stolen from them too. Our pride hadn't just hurt us. It had robbed them of family, of connections, of love they deserved. Sarah told my father she wished she'd known him growing up, and he told her he wished that too more than anything. Michael asked why great-grandpa had tubes in his arms, and my father explained he was very sick. "Will you get better?" Michael asked, with that pure, hopeful way children have. My father looked at me, then back at Michael. "I don't think so, buddy. But meeting you has made me feel better than any medicine could. We spent 3 more days together. My father told stories about his own childhood, about my mother, about the young man he'd been before life and fear had hardened him. I told him about my life, my career, my struggles and triumphs. We laughed about silly things and cried about the years we'd lost. On the 4th day, he slipped into unconsciousness. The doctor said it was time, that his body was shutting down. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand, and I talked to him even though I didn't know if he could hear me. I told him I loved him. I told him I was grateful for these last days together. I told him I'd make sure Michael knew about him, that I'd tell him what a strong man his great-grandfather was, flawed but brave enough to say sorry in the end. That evening, with me holding one hand and Mary holding the other, my father took his last breath. He died at peace, reconciled, forgiven. At his funeral, I stood at the podium and told everyone what had happened. I told them about our 50 years of silence, about our pride, about those precious final days. I told them because I needed people to understand what I'd learned. That life is too short for grudges. That pride is worthless compared to love. That sorry might be the hardest word to say, but it's also the most important. That no matter how much time has passed, it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, to try again. After the funeral, people came up to me with their own stories, so many people carrying their own silences, their own broken relationships, their own pride. A woman told me she hadn't spoken to her sister in 10 years over a borrowed dress. A man said he and his son hadn't talked in 5 years over politics. I looked each of them in the eye and said, call them today, don't wait, don't let pride steal one more day from you. I'm 92 years old now and I carry both gratitude and regret. Gratitude for those final days with my father, for the forgiveness we gave each other, for the peace we found before the end. Regret for the 50 years we wasted, for all the moments we can never get back. Sarah now brings Michael to visit me every week. He's 12 now, smart and kind, and he asks me questions about his great-grandfather. I tell him the truth. I tell him we made a terrible mistake, that we let pride and anger keep us apart, but that in the end, love won. I want him to learn from our mistake. I want him to understand that relationships are more important than being right, that family is precious, that forgiveness is strength, not weakness. Last week, Michael asked me if I was happy that I got to see great-grandpa before he died. I told him yes, I was grateful beyond words. Then he asked, "But are you sad about all the time before?" I looked at this wise young boy and told him the truth. I'm heartbroken about it, Michael. Every single day. But that sadness taught me something important. It taught me never to take the people I love for granted. It taught me to say sorry quickly. It taught me that pride is poison and forgiveness is medicine. If you remember nothing else I tell you, remember this. Life is too short, too precious, too fragile to waste on silence and grudges. If you love someone, tell them. If you've hurt someone, apologize. If someone hurts you, try to forgive them. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because that moment might never come. Don't wait until someone is dying to say the things that matter. My father and I got lucky. We got those final days, but we didn't have to lose 50 years first. That was our choice, our mistake, our tragedy. Don't make the same mistake we did. Pick up the phone, send the message, knock on the door, swallow your pride, say you're sorry, say you forgive them, say I love you. Do it today, right now, because tomorrow isn't promised, and silence is the cruelest legacy we can leave behind.